I'm going to repeat the question. Before we start, put your hand up if you know what an impact editor is.
Less hands than before.
Yeah, less hands. You're in the right place. Hi everyone, thank you for coming to this session, The Impact Editor, what it is and how and why your newsroom needs one. And hello to everyone online too. So for the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk and discuss with the impressive Miriam Wells, who's the Impact Editor at The Examination, which is a global investigative public health newsroom. We'll be thinking about all the dimensions of an impact editor role and impact culture. I'm Richard Addy. I'm a recovering economist and a news media strategist. Work for ACAS, which has developed its own impacts framework with the Gates Foundation, the Guardian, NPR, and many others. And it's been supported by a large range of other organizations. So we're going to crack on. Miriam, why did you pitch this session?
Well, because there's a lot of people who don't know what an impact editor is. Now, hi everyone. I'm really glad to see the room so full. This is great. So yeah, I'm Miriam. I've been an impact editor for 5 years. I feel incredibly lucky that I have a job kind of dedicated to making journalism a greater force for good in the world, and I feel really passionate about that. I also want to share these ideas. I've been going to conferences, obviously, for a long time now, and I think we're seeing increasing conversation about impact at the conferences, which is amazing, but they tend to be focused around measuring. There's a lot more and more talk about measuring impact, metrics for impact, and so on. I want to talk about making it. Like, right, how do we make impact? What kind of impact is journalism here to make, and how do we make more of it? And that's what the impact editor role is all about. The thinking doesn't have to be confined to that particular role. So I wanted to pitch this panel really just to talk about that. Like, let's talk about making before or as well as when we talk about the measuring.
Excellent. So when I first met you, I think it was about 5 years ago, I think it's fair to say that you were the world's first impact editor. Woo. So I know what it is, but can you tell us a bit more about what you actually do day to day?
Well, first and foremost, I want to emphasize the word editor in this job title. This isn't a role that's sitting on the outside of the journalism, kind of tracking and communicating the impact that kind of happens to occur. This is a role inside the senior leadership team, inside the senior editorial team, really helping to shape and deliver and execute journalism in a way that maximizes its value in the world. So the kind of very top level of kind of why are we here, what value are we bringing to the world, what value are we bringing to our audiences, and then building the culture and the workflows and the processes that will make that kind of vision a reality. That's a sort of very top level kind of, we have only got 20 minutes, so, but yeah, that's a quick intro.
So what was your own personal impact journey, as well as thinking about the relevance of impact for organizations? Journalists themselves, when we think about their careers, what they do. You've had experience at BBC News, local news, Sunday Times, New York Times, Human Rights Watch, which is fascinating. So why impact? Why not the political desk or the foreign desk?
Well, it's a bit cheesy, I guess, but I kind of feel like what I'm doing now is this kind of fruition of, it's sort of like everything I did before led me to this place. It sounds incredibly cheesy. But yeah, I've done kind of everything. I started out as a local newspaper reporter. I worked in BBC radio newsrooms as a producer and writing bulletins. I worked in BBC Current Affairs TV. I took a career break at the BBC, went to Human Rights Watch. I'd always been in, I was that classic idealistic teenager that's like, I want to make the world a better place, and I'm going to do that by being a journalist. So I kind of always had that in my mind as to why I wanted to do the job. Had this dream of being a foreign correspondent, so I took voluntary redundancy from the BBC and went to Latin America. And I was in Colombia for 2 years and Brazil for a year. And it was absolutely amazing. I managed to become a sort of de facto unofficial Latin America correspondent for the Sunday Times. Had an amazing time working for the New York Times during the World Cup. And it was as I was there, and after I'd done this spell at Human Rights Watch as well, I kind of began to get a little bit disillusioned. Like I was doing these amazing stories, and I could cover like the worst human rights abuses, like horrible stories about stuff that was important stories about things that were happening, and getting them into the biggest selling newspaper in the UK, but then feeling like, well, it's not actually, nothing's actually going to happen, or it's not really going to change anything. I knew the cumulative effect of journalism was massive, but I was struggling to feel like kind of tangible, like meaning out of my work. So I wasn't sure if I was going to leave journalism altogether. I came back to the UK, and I needed money. I ended up started working at Vice, and then overnight my desk got closed down, and so then I really sort of took the opportunity to think, right, if I'm going to keep doing this, what do I really want to do? And I thought non-profit, mission-driven, investigative journalism, and it just so happened that the Bureau of Investigative Journalism was looking for a production editor. So I went there. Sorry, this is a long answer, which we realised before might be too long. But it was a small organisation then, and I was production editor, but as is always the case in a small organisation, kind of doing everything, doing lots of different things, and through to working with reporters, getting the stories in shape, editing, pictures, all of that, doing the social media, and thinking about the impact. And it was a conversation we were having more and more at the Bureau. Like we were mission-driven, and we always did a bit of non-traditional stuff, but it was quite organic and ad hoc. So we started talking more and more about impact and how to make more of it. And we commissioned a report by a board member, Christo Hurd, called The Mechanism of Impact. It really looked at 4 incredibly impactful instances of journalism over time. It looked at Watergate, looked at the thalidomide scandal in the UK in the 80s, and so just 2 other instances of very impactful journalism. And he looked at what had happened, like how had that impact come about. And the 2 biggest conclusions were that 1, journalism doesn't change anything on its own, which is a message I'm always needing to shout. Nothing ever changes because the story's published, and even when it seems that way, there's always a lot more that's going on, and other people and things happening behind the scenes. Like journalism is this incredibly important part of the ecosystem of change. And that's why we have to understand where we sit in that ecosystem and connect ourselves better to the other pieces of that puzzle to really play our role most effectively. So that was one of his conclusions. And then the other was, any sort of newsroom really wanting to make an impact with its journalism should think about creating this impact editor role. So then I took it up.
You talk about journalism, part of the ecosystem of change, but how would you address the challenge that often an impacts editor is really an activist?
Well, aren't we just, this sounds like activism. This is literally the first question that I get whenever I speak about this. So my first answer actually is I completely agree with this. Like, we're not activists. It's not our job to make a particular change occur. Absolutely not. And I think the culture change with that was the biggest challenge of starting in this role, was like this anxiety that this was, we were going to somehow compromise the integrity of the whole journalistic operation. And it's not our job as journalists to say what should or shouldn't happen, or what change should or shouldn't come about. But we're all like really happy to sit and say, journalism protects democracy, or journalism holds power to account. Journalism, informs and educates and inspires, those kind of things. That's what we're talking about. That is the impact of journalism, and that is journalism playing a role in positive change. If you sit back and sort of think, right, this is the important story, and we're just going to click publish, and, well, it's nothing to do with us, what happens to it? That's kind of, I feel like it's only doing half your job. Like, this role of impact, it's just about making journalism do its job properly. Like, we are here to do, nobody becomes a journalist, I hope, because who doesn't think it does something good in the world, they're doing it because they think journalism matters. If you think journalism matters, then let's be intentional and strategic about making it matter more, because I know from experience that you are going to massively transform a lot of things, as we're going to get onto.
And that's such a good point, because obviously as journalists we think we're making a difference. I remember seeing a piece of research from the UK about 10 years ago. People were asked whether you thought investigative journalism had a big impact in society. 90% of the journalists said yes, which is a positive thing, but only half the audience agreed with that. So there's a real gap in perceptions, and an impacts narrative is critical in that. So we're in an industry at the moment which is facing lots of financial challenges. Latest estimates I've seen as $2 billion will be wiped off the global newspaper industry just this year, jobs being lost, establishments being closed down. So at this time, can we afford an impact editor or impact editor?
Well, I'm going to sound cheesy again, but I said that is like, can we afford not to have the impact editor? Like this is another thing I think we don't talk about enough. Like we don't talk about the business case. This is absolutely a sustainability enterprise just as much as a moral one. Like it's failing to think really deeply about our audiences and our communities and what value we're bringing to them and how we're representing them, how we're serving them. Like that is exactly what has led traditional business models off a cliff. And this is exactly why, like, you know, so many, all of the things that you've just described are happening. Like, and all of the, you know, sort of big commercial operations that are, you know, to have managed to pull themselves back up and like radically transform and are doing really well. They're the ones that are thinking really deeply about their communities, their members, the successful membership programs you see, like at the New York Times, the Guardian. Like they're thinking about the value that they are bringing to the world at large and to those audiences and to those communities. You know, it's absolutely essential. You know, obviously, if you're in a philanthropically funded organization, then it's, you know, you've got a demonstrable return on investment that you can show to funders. But yeah, I think that it's just as important for commercial operations to be thinking about the value that they're seeking to bring as well. So
what would you say are the biggest challenges in embracing and trying to inculcate an impact culture? Often when I engage with organizations, they often seem daunted, paralyzed, and suspicious. So what are the challenges you have to overcome? Well,
overcoming that's like number one. Yeah, it's the culture change. It's sort of that we already talked about, you know, a bit. It's the persuading everyone that this isn't about activism. It's you have to have like bright buy-in from the top. Like this is just not going to work ever if it's someone on the side trying to make stuff happen. You know, changing workflows and processes, which actually really does help to change culture. That, you know, it's hard. Like people don't want to change things that they've, you know, the way that they do things, and thinking that stuff that's going to add more time or detract you from the story. So it's really sort of building, like it took a really long time, even at a mission-driven organization like the Bureau, which wanted to make a difference, explicitly mission-driven, to sort of, you have to show the value and how you're actually going to make that work go further, and it's going to be...
So practically, how did you do that? Just take yourself back to when you started at the Bureau and now at the investigation.
The examination.
The examination. What are the steps you've taken or you took to start bringing that culture alive?
I mean, the first thing you have to do is really get everyone to kind of on the same page and united, and it can't be something, you know, it has to be, you have to come up with the vision collaboratively. So, I mean, I actually started in both instances with a workshop where I asked everyone why they became a journalist, and, you know, it's always some version of a kind of tell truth to power, or to try, you know, it was all some version of to do something good in the world. So it's like, okay, that's what we're here for, so let's just interrogate. How do we feel like our journalism is going to do that? How could it do that better? And crucially, like, who are we here for? You know, so it's really addressing those questions head on about activism and you know, and threatening, you know, people's ability to like really chase the story and so on. So just allowing for a lot of conversation, but just trying to you need to get everyone united around a common vision and purpose for the organization and an understanding of the steps and like. That will be required to like really make that reality. I mean, it's hard. I mean, I'm only just starting at the examination, and I've been there since November, but we're just building this thing up. It's not something that happens overnight. But yeah.
Okay. So before I open up the questions, what do you want journalist people to do after this session, both personally and for their organisations?
I think I'd like them to ask themselves that question, I guess, like, why did I become a journalist and why am I? Like, what value do I want my journalism to bring to the world, or what value do I want my newsroom to bring to the world? And, you know, am I doing that, or are we doing that, right, you know, in the best way that we could right now? I mean, and maybe they're big, hard questions, but just get, you know, dial back out and just really get back to that kind of question of why am I here and why am I doing this? Like just asking yourself that, or having that conversation in the newsroom is one step forward. It's just to being more intentional and strategic. And I can't stress enough, like I know from experience that being intentional and strategic, you know, it transformed the impact that the Bureau was having from top to bottom, community level to policy change. And that's one other thing I wanted to say about culture change, about challenges, that it's not that challenging that top-down narrative of impact, that this is about trying to get policy change and trying to get laws change. Yes, it is, but actually, if you just make change at the top, you're never going to change the system that has enabled this wrongdoing, this injustice in the first place. So I'd say change at the community level is probably more important, if not just as important, and often that impact can come through the process of how you do the journalism as much as the ultimate product, but we're really getting into it a bit too deep now, so I'll stop.
Okay, opening up for questions. We've got quite a few at the back. Please say who you are before you ask a question.
Is on? Matthias Böhlinger from Deutsche Welle. I'd like to ask, what exactly do you do? How does your day look like? When do you come into an investigation? What exactly do you do?
Yeah, I was thinking I probably didn't actually give enough of the day-to-day. So sitting in the senior editorial team and being part of the decisions around what to greenlight, well, actually before you even get to that, those decisions around like what beats are we going to cover and what are our big picture goals with this and how we're going to structure it, you know, so coming up with the editorial strategy is I'm not doing that on my own, but playing a big role in developing an editorial strategy that is going to sort of maximize the impact. I'm doing all the sort of same things as a regular editor does, basically, but I'm thinking always about what the journalism will do. You know, they're thinking about what the story is, and I'm thinking about what the story will do. So I would week to week, I'd be sitting in the senior editorial meetings, like when we're greenlighting pitches or we're developing pitches. Asking sort of impact-focused questions. When it comes to process and workflow, we've done a lot of things like we've brought in, you know, when reporters are pitching their stories, they're not just pitching the top lines, they're also pitching kind of the potential impact, or you can't necessarily know that when you're doing a story, but sort of you know, how this might be useful, how this might be valuable, and working with the teams to make sure they're building relationships with, I talked before about, you know, being being a piece in the puzzle, so building relationships with lawyers, civil society organizations, documentary makers, kind of community organizations, all the kind of people that can take journalism and do something with it. So,
so when you say building relationships, you mean you're actually going out meetings with them or trying to find out who the influencers and decision makers are?
I mean, a lot of these, they're all the same kind of organizations that a reporter would be in touch with, right, if they're following a beat, you know. So it's just thinking of them not just as sources of information, but also as, you know, the people that are going to be able to take your work and use it to drive change. So just sort of being more plugged into what they're doing and vice versa. Again, we're not somehow becoming activists. We're not, you know, we're not telling them, you know, what we're doing, or they're not influencing our editorial agenda, but we just need, given that that's how the journalism does change. It just works. If you can feed into their work and vice versa, everybody's impact is strengthened. So I do, and then when it comes to the actual distribution of the stories, we're thinking really, we sort of detailed audience mapping, thinking a lot about partners, the examination and the Bureau, they co-publish everything they do. So making sure that we're thinking both about how we're going to reach the most people, but also the right people with our partners. And that's on and off the page. So doing a lot of work around like how we get our journalism out there into the world in ways beyond the page and screen, because there's a lot of people that could really benefit from it, or who should be paying attention, or who could use it, who aren't going to access it through those legacy platforms, or even those, you know, small independent newspapers. You know, so we, you know, help community events, briefings. We've collaborated with theatre makers, with computer game designers. There's a million different ways that journalism can go out there.
Right. Okay, I'm keen to get some more questions in. Got someone in the front.
Hi, I'm Stephanie, a freelance journalist from the Netherlands, and I'm wondering, can you give an example of a particular story and what kind of impact you made with it?
Yeah, we were talking about whether to include an example, right? So I was like, the examples will take time, but and I can't decide which one I chose. I mean, I often talk about an example of an investigation the Bureau did. For any of you that were at GIJC in Sweden in November, I apologize because you're about to hear the same example. But we did an investigation looking at gig economy pay, looking at Deliveroo, which is the big food delivery app in the UK, and we're looking at how much they were paying their riders. There's complete opacity, like nobody knew how much gig economy riders were being paid. Even the riders themselves didn't know how much they were being, you know, how much they would be paid, or why they were paid, what they were paid. So this was a story that came from the riders themselves. So it came. We did a sort of call out for community, to communities across the UK, asking what we should be investigating. Okay, how do I do this quickly? So we collaborated with riders and their union to gather invoices of how much people were getting paid for each shift. We collaborated a huge database, and we ultimately found out that the riders were being paid less than the minimum wage, and some of them were paid as little as £2 an hour. This huge company. We thought about the goals for that investigation. The goals were multifaceted. We wanted to empower riders with information about their pay and how much they were being paid and what they could sort of build the connections between the community of riders that were out there. We wanted to inform investor kind of conversation and decisions. Deliveroo was about to float on the London Stock Exchange later that year, so it was supposed to be like the biggest flotation. It was billed to be the biggest flotation of a company ever on the London Stock Exchange. So we obviously thought about the timing. We thought we want to be influencing conversation, and so we sort of set about timing it to come out a few weeks before that. And we wanted to sort of obviously inform consumers of Deliveroo meals and products. So then we had a multifaceted publishing approach. We went out in the sort of primetime evening news show on ITV. We had a tabloid paper, to reach that wide consumer audience. We posted messages within the Deliveroo app so that riders that hadn't been part of the crowdsourcing could access the investigation, and then we did a tailored press release that went out to hundreds of business and financial publications and journalists around the world. And we also sort of seeded it a little bit with some of them beforehand. So we ended up with a huge amount of coverage, and it went absolutely I think the timing was a big part of that, but that's part of the planning, right? So we had it sort of more than 250 people picking it up. We had 6 major pension funds saying that they wouldn't be investing in Deliveroo shares. There was a huge conversation about workers' rights in the gig economy, that was the primary kind of goal, and that was happening around the world, which was amazing. And one of the riders, really importantly, who worked with us on it, had a really meaningful, good experience. And one of the riders decided that he wanted to become a journalist, which was another impact that I really liked. So yeah.
Now that's impact. Okay.
Yeah.
A couple more questions, hopefully, before we close.
Hi, I'm Saada Nursen. I'm chief editor of One World, based in Amsterdam. You keep mentioning that we're not activists. Besides the fact that I think activism for more justice, because we practice journalism for justice, is great. How do you determine positive impact ahead of, in the decision-making process? Because, some people would say impact is very broad, there are newspapers who are like, less migrants, great impact, or no trans people, great impact. So what are the criteria for impact for the examination or for you?
For our organization, okay, so I was saying it's all about, every organization will have its own version of it. I mean, we're really, we're a public health investigative outlook. We're really seeking, it's really focused corporate accountability for preventable death and disease. We're looking at the big industries which drive death and sickness around the world. Again, I don't think I'd be able to do this job at all if I wasn't in the role I'm in, because it would be too bleak. So that kind of comes into the measuring question. We're thinking about how our work can feed into change at different levels. So we're thinking, if you're thinking about the policy making and sort of legislative sphere regulation, we're really seeking to have our evidence used by regulators. That informing that level of decision maker and regulator would be a key goal, and we would measure that by the extent to which our evidence or our findings both reach those people and are actively used by those people. We're seeking to strengthen the kind of work of all the other organisations that are also seeking positive change in the public health sphere, so all of the civil society organisations, lawyers, community organisations, patients groups, health professionals. So we would also be looking at the extent to which our work is being useful and used by them. And then in terms of the people that are directly affected and most harmed by health inequity, that is really our big goal that is really to be involving those groups in the making and in the making of the journalism itself. Like, we're really new, by the way, so we actually have we don't have but we're thinking those are the sort of three kind of groups. I'd say we're most focused. Our biggest priority at the moment is on the groups most directly harmed by. And how we have to, it's no good just going, how is our work genuinely going to do something useful? And that will vary from investigation to investigation. But, we've just, I was going to give one more example of.
Oh, no, we need to sneak in one more question and then we'll have to close.
Hi, I'm Benas from Lithuanian Public Broadcaster, LRT. Just wondering about the partnerships you mentioned. Are you talking in the sense that merely like publishing partners, or also like making sure that it lands on the desk of, parliamentary committee, NGO, or, even taking the work offline, organizing, conferences on the back of it, etc.? How does it look like?
100%, not just so. And also, I probably shouldn't have said publishing partners, because we're really seeking to co-report on everything we do at the examination. We're not just bringing people in at the end, and we're really trying to make the partnerships a more equitable experience as well. It's another big issue in journalism. But yeah, in terms of if you're wanting to reach a community with, it will almost invariably be that you have to do that in partnership with an organisation or an individual or an institution, whatever it is, that has trust within that community. You can't just arrive and be like, here's our findings, and you should pay, that here they are, they should be useful to you. So, we will have, if you're doing an investigation, you will already be in contact with the kind of organisations, as I said before, that are going to be able to take your work and use it. So if that's the Environment Committee at the EU Parliament, then we definitely going to do at the Bureau a lot. We did presentations at parliamentary level, briefings and so on. Events with community organisations, all sorts of, you have to think about, who is the audience and who's the community that you're hoping to reach, and how do you meet them where they are with this journalism? Because just publishing it isn't usually enough.
Okay, thank you very much, Miriam. Round of applause for Miriam.
And to you, Richard.
Thank you for all the attendees. And if you want more information, Miriam's details here. I'm Richard Addy on LinkedIn. You can get in touch with me directly too. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the festival.